Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy Amoretti, and I'm Assistant Director of our ACU Online Writing Center. And I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. Tanya Hart, who is one of our awesome tutors. Say hi, Tanya.
Hey, Emmy. Hey, everybody.
Hi, I love working with Tanya, so this is great fun for me. This webinar addresses the topic of writing a compare and contrast paper, recommended practices. Along with the recording of the webinar, we'll be releasing a link to the slide deck, and the links to the resources in the slide deck will be active. If you have any questions about the webinar content, we invite you to reach out to us at the Online Writing Center through through our email or one of the other means that we'll outline at the end of this webinar session. So these are our learning objectives for this webinar. By the end of the session, we will explore strategies for writing compare and contrast papers, workshop CONR 628's Week 4 Assignment 4, Resiliency and Family Conflict, and develop an APA formatted draft. Let's start by focusing on learning objective 1, which Tanya's going to tell you about.
Okay, let's look at learning objective 1. But before we start talking about writing strategies, let's deal with the basics for this by talking about what comparing and contrasting means and why we might want to write a compare and contrast paper to begin with. So, in the sense that we're addressing it here for this assignment, when I say comparing, comparing means to explain how two subjects are similar. Okay, so comparing how are two subjects similar. And by subjects, I'm talking about people. Subjects can be things, they can be places, they can be concepts. Okay, but comparing means similarities. How are the two subjects similar? By contrast, contrasting means explaining how the subjects are different. Okay, comparing, similarities, contrast, difference. Now, for this paper, you're tasked with comparing and contrasting family resiliency during conflict. How do families show resilience? How do they not show resilience? What happens during a familial conflict? Okay. You're going to be using skills of logic and reasoning to compare and explain how subjects, in these case, the families, are similar, but also to contrast and explain how you see these subjects, these families differing in how they deal with conflict. So that's the foundation for this compare and contrast assignment. Now, I'm going to throw something else in there. Okay. I'm talking about for this assignment. This means comparing, this means contrasting. Note that sometimes instructors or assignments can use the word compare differently. If you ever receive an assignment that asks you to just, in quotes, compare, you might want to talk to the instructor beforehand to verify if they want you to show only similarities or if they want you to address both similarities and differences. So that, put that in your little mind and in the back in a little folder, when you see compare in the future, ask the instructor what that means. For this assignment, comparing means similarities, contrasting means difference. So, first, why do we compare and contrast in the first place? Why on earth would anyone want to write a comparison and a contrast paper? So, first of all, think of it as you're teaching someone. Think of it like enlightenment. You're trying to bring light into darkness. You're trying to enlighten or show your audience, whomever your reader is, you're trying to show them things that they maybe normally wouldn't see. Okay. Compare and contrast means showing things that you see as similar or different from your own perspectives. So for this assignment, you're limited. Okay, you're limited to comparing and contrasting family resilience in times of conflict. That's it. On the other hand, we at the ACU Online Writing Center, we don't deal with limitations. Okay, so instead, talking about this assignment, we're going to look very broadly at the animal kingdom, and then we're going to come in narrower to compare and contrast bees and elephants. Because maybe at first thought, a bee and an elephant may have more in common than you would think. Or maybe they're just too different, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to do bees and elephants. So, enlightenment is the first thing. You're going to enlighten your audience to see things that they wouldn't normally see, comparing and contrasting. Okay. Second, decision making. You might want to do a compare and contrast and look at subjects differently to enable your audience, other readers and writers, to be able to evaluate their choices and make better decisions. So, okay, you've got elephants and bees off to the side, and you're wondering why. We'll get to it later, but they're there. Okay. But for right now, for this moment, think of a more modern business perspective in terms of decision making. So let's say you work for a big multinational that at their local branch, they need somebody to come in and choose between different product suites to protect their IT network. Everybody's all concerned about IT nowadays. You're the guru. You've been chosen as the researcher who's asked to evaluate these two products, to compare and contrast each to see basically what they have to offer in terms of cost and efficiency. So, what you come up with from your research is going to help your business make a wiser decision than just, I don't know, going with what's cheaper or what's more available, because you're giving them a report where you've done a comparison and a contrast, going through all the things that these two product suites offer, and you're giving them an option so that the business can make a most cost effective, economical decision. So, number two, decisions, compare and contrast to enable your audience, other readers, other writers to evaluate their choices and make better decisions. Finally, why compare and contrast? Well, when we define and evaluate similarities and differences between subjects or groups, sometimes we can see how one subject or group informs our understanding of another subject or group. Okay, so let's say you've got a teacher, all right? You know, someone who's a teacher, the teacher is teaching a course, and suddenly she realizes that within her class, she's dealing with two separate groups. She's got one group that's understanding the curriculum and mastering what she's teaching, and the other group is kind of struggle bus. Okay, they're struggling with understanding and gaining mastery. Okay, so the teacher sees this, and if she investigates learner traits and differences in how the two groups have been taught learning strategies, then that can help her identify learning gaps and be able to develop a more overall effective teaching strategy that can bring in people from both groups. So sometimes, again, learning to define and evaluate similarities and differences between groups and subjects, we can see how one subject or one group actually informs our understanding of the other. So, that said, we've laid some groundwork. Now let's look at some strategies for developing effective compare and contrast papers. So, first, we're going to look at two organizational strategies: point by point structure and block structure. And then over time, we'll talk about the use of transitions. So, the first way to organize a compare and contrast paper is through point by point structure. Now, when I say point by point structure, I'm talking really basic here. Okay, point by point structure is this. First, you discuss each point or major concept about a subject, subject A, and then you move to subject B and you discuss each point or major concept. So you just go point by point by point by point, before moving on to the next one. So let's build a model here. We're looking at organization, a point by point structure. And let's go back to the OWC and our obsession with the animal kingdom. Okay. We choose to discuss the similarities and the differences between elephants and bees. So within this very broad topic of elephant and bee differences and similarities, I might decide that I want to show how they are similar and different in terms of organized social structure and communication. So those are the two different things that we're going to use for comparison and contrast. In this case, I could list elements of the social structure of elephants rather, and then I could use elements of the social structure of bees. Then I could list the communication methods of bees, and I could use the communication elements of elephants. But I would use them in the same order in both halves of the paper. So if we're looking at, let's see, slide 7 here,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got point 1, social structure, and you've got the first group being elephants. I could use 3 things about the social structure of elephants, and then I could use 3 things about the social structure of bees. And then I would move on to point 2, communication, 3 things about the communication of elephants, 3 things about the communication of bees. You could just look right across social structure, point by point, elephants, point by point, bees, then communication, point by point, elephants, then point by point, bees. Okay, that's with the point by point structure. Now, going on to the next slide, the other way to organize a compare and contrast paper is through block structure. Using a block structure means that you discuss all the points or the major concepts about subject A before moving on to discuss the same points about subject B. So in slide 8, under block structure, I've got elements. I'm going to be talking about their social structure and their communication. And then I'm going to discuss bees and their social structure and communication. So I've created 2 blocks, an elephant block and a bee block. Try saying that fast real quick. That's hard to say. Elephant block, bee block. I've got 2 blocks, one for elephants, one for bees. The elephant block goes first. I'll first describe and discuss elephant social structure and elephant communication. That's my elephant block. The bee block would go second. I would describe and discuss bee social structure and then bee communication. Each half of the paper would be devoted to one subject. There would be boom, an elephant block, and then boom, a bee block. I would discuss the points in the same order in both the elephant block and the bee block. So let's move on. Now that we've discussed point by point and block structures for compare and contrast, we can decide which organizational method we want to use for a specific compare and contrast writing situation. Okay, so for this purpose, when you get to this point, it helps to understand how the different strategies will compare and contrast with each other. So here Emmy, in her brilliance, has created a Venn diagram. No, seriously, to show how these things overlap.
My son's a big fan of the Venn diagram.
Hey, that's all that matters. What I want you to pay attention to is what Emmy's son saw. That's in the middle, the both section, because the benefits of both for contrast and comparison are the same. Both patterns are designed to emphasize comparisons and contrast, period. Point to point or block. They're both designed to do the same thing. Similarly, they both benefit from a writer's conscientious use of transitions. We'll be talking more about that later. But basically, if it's point to point you decide to use for comparison contrast, or if it's block that you decide to use for comparison contrast, they're both doing the same thing. They're emphasizing comparisons and contrast.
Awesome. So now that we've looked at how these two strategies are similar, let's look at how they're different. The first way that they're different relates to how they're organized. A point-by-point draft is organized by point, with each point applied to both subjects before the next point is addressed. In contrast, a draft that applies block structure is organized into two blocks or halves, one for each subject compared. This means that with point-by-point structure, you're going to flip-flop between the subjects as you go through the points. And with block structure, you are going to talk about subject A in its entirety, our elephants, before you talk about subject B, our bees, at all. A second difference is that point-by-point structure with its alternating pattern will allow for more nuanced and integrated comparisons and contrasts of the two subjects. By going back and forth between elephants and bees, you're going to be able to pinpoint and emphasize those differences a little bit more easily. On the other hand, block structure allows for greater focus on and understanding of one subject at a time. So maybe if I need to go into a little bit more detail about elephants and a little bit more detail about bees, I'm going to be able to do that in block structure without having to worry about bouncing whatever I'm saying about elephants off of whatever I'm saying about bees at the same time. And our third difference is well, it's some caveats. Point-by-point structure may be difficult to implement if the points are numerous or complicated. If you have too much to say, too many points, it's going to be really hard to go back and forth because it's just going to get so difficult to follow. In that case, you may want to use block structure. Block structure, however, can make the connections between the subjects harder to discern by not putting something about elephants right next to something about bees. It's going to be harder for the reader to connect those two. But again, maybe you're more interested in focusing on or helping the reader to understand the subject, what's going on with elephants and what's going on with bees. So the way we've just presented the information in this Venn diagram actually echoes the presentation of point-by-point structure. We addressed one point at a time for each subject or both subjects before we moved on to the next point. However, we can also use this Venn diagram to illustrate block structure, because I could discuss all the points down the left side of the diagram to explain my first subject, which in this case was point-by-point structure. And I could discuss all the points down the right side of the diagram to explain my second subject. If I went down the left side and then down the right side, I'd create two blocks in my paper if this were my topic. So what does this tell us about when we may want to use one of these presentation options or the other? A writer may want to choose point-by-point structure if they're working with a limited number of points, and if discussing the subjects in alternation is necessary to help the reader make those connections. Nonetheless, they may want to choose block structure if each subject requires complex consideration. That would make point-by-point too busy or complicated. And in this case, they can reasonably draw the significance of the comparisons and contrasts together at the end, which we've just done here. We've gone through all of our details, and at the end, we've tied it back together. Why have we been comparing and contrasting point by point in block structure? Because we want to know in which situation is the best to use them.
Before we move on, let's consider the importance of transitions, okay? Because I've talked about the paper, but then let's look at transitions. Because you might have noticed that as I was discussing like the Venn diagram that Emmy created, I started using a lot of transitional words like first or similarly or in contrast or on the other hand. Okay. So what are transitions? Transitions are words and phrases that help a writer show the relationship between sections of a text and make it easier for the audience to be able to follow along. Okay. So these signals are especially important when you're communicating comparisons and you're trying to show your readers how you intend for the different details to relate. So we have some transitions that signify similarity listed on a slide. Let me move to that slide for transitions. Emmy, what slide is that?
That's
I'm
slide 14.
talking. Thank you.
Mhm.
So here are some transitions that we would use to just show a relationship between what we're talking about, to show similarity. So similarly or similar to, in the same way, if you're showing comparison, in like manner, this compares to this. If we're talking about, again, the elephants of bees, in the same way or in likewise, the way that elephants work, bees work in a like manner. Elephants do this, also bees do that. These show comparisons, similarities between the two, okay? Now, for contrast, in the next slide, unlike, however, although, on the other hand, in contrast, yet, nonetheless, whereas, we're showing differences here, differences between subjects. Here's a sentence that you might use. Unlike a resilient family, a family that does not display characteristics of resilience may lack effective regulatory processes for communication and problem solving. So these are ways to talk about difference, transitions, but there are also transitions of comparison that you will be using in your writing. Okay, so let's talk about CONR 628, week 4, assignment 4, resiliency and family conflict. Let's kind of leave the elephants and bees aside for a moment to actually talk about this. And on slide 17, you've got the hookup, the actual connection with that assignment. So for the instructions on slide 18, you're supposed to critically analyze how the presence and absence of resiliency characteristics may impact conflict resolution in a family. Respond to the following prompts based on this week's readings. First, how does a family displaying characteristics of resilience manage their conflicts? Second, if a conflict isn't resolved, how do the family members interact with one another in a resilient family? You're supposed to contrast the two above prompts with a family that doesn't display characteristics of resilience. So, going on to the next slide, here are the specifications for your paper. First, you're going to be creating a word document. Second, you have limitation, only 1,500 words for your word count. And you have to include your word count on your title page. 1,500 words maximum. Third, don't quote your sources. I don't know how many times just in the online writing center, I'm always encouraging students, stop quoting, paraphrase, paraphrase. Paraphrasing just shows so much intelligence. I mean, quoting is like, oh, that sounds good. Why does it sound good? I don't know. Paraphrasing is when you could break things down and put things into your own words. So don't quote. Paraphrase, cite, and then reference using APA format. Fourth, double space your paper. On average, using 12-point font, 250 words is about a page length for double spaced paper with 12-point times New Roman font. Okay. Here is the rubric. And here are how you're going to be rated. Again, 1,500 word count on your reflection, that's worth 10 points. Critically analyzing the impact of the presence and absence of family resilience characteristics. It will be up to you to decide if you're going to use point by point or if you're going to use block. Student discussed how family displaying resilience characteristic manages conflict. That's high, that's 25 points. Student discussed how family displaying resilience characteristics recovers from irresolvable conflict. High, 25 points. Student contrasted the difference in management and recovery in the absence of resilience. That's the highest. How do you show contrasting the difference in management and recovery in the absence of resiliency, of resilience characteristics? 30 points. You really have to think through that one and show it. And then finally, 10 points. Paper is formatted according to APA guidelines, including correct in-text citations and a reference page. And if you turn it in and you don't have citations and a reference page, it's going to be sent back with the notice to rewrite with deductions for late submission. So get it right the first time in terms of the in-text citations and the reference page. And then really when it comes to your analysis with your critical thinking skills in terms of the difference in management and recovery, when you've got resiliency and absence, how do family members deal with each other? How do they interact with each other? How does a family display resilience characteristics when they do recover from irreconcilable or irresolvable conflict? And then how did they family display resilience managing a conflict? Those are the really three big ones. You've really got to chew through and come up with the examples using either point by point or block for your compass, for your compare and contrast.
So now that we've looked at the assignment, let's talk more about how to approach the content itself. First, of course, we need to consider the questions. You have two big questions that you're going to need to answer for both subjects. The first subject is a family that displays characteristics of resilience, and the second is a family that does not display characteristics of resilience. The first question is, how do both types of families manage their conflict? And the second question is, if the conflict isn't resolved, how do the members of the resilient family continue to interact with each other? Or how do they interact, in other words, after a conflict fails to be resolved? After you consult with your sources, you may want to set up a table like this one, which kind of closely resembles our Venn diagram from earlier, except we've only got the contrast sides. and you can list some key differences for each question. Here we've actually rewritten the questions as sentence stems that give you another way to think about it. So on the left, a family that displays characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by do, do, do. If a conflict is not resolved, the members of a resilient family interact with one another by do, do, do. And then on the right, a family that does not display characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by do, do, do. And if a conflict is not resolved, the members of a family that does not display resilience interact with one another by do, do, do. So let's think about it this way. In both circumstances, what kinds of behaviors do we see in the resilient family and in the family that doesn't display characteristics of resilience? Next, how do these behaviors tie to the characteristics of resilience or the lack of those characteristics? Um, the family that behaves in a certain way as they manage their conflicts, what they're doing probably aligns with the fact that they're resilient. And the family that does not display these characteristics, their behaviors are going to echo the fact that they do not have these characteristics of resilience. Finally, how do the behaviors impact the other members of the family and either perpetuate the resilience or the lack of resilience? These are just some things that you can think about in the midst of those larger questions to help you kind of figure out how to create a picture of what's going on and analyze what's going on in both circumstances. So as I mentioned, this is similar to our Venn diagram from earlier. So we can also use it to consider your organizational approach. If you'd like to apply point-by-point structure, you can follow the rows of the table across. The top row, a family that displays characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by ... In contrast, a family that does not display characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by ... And then for the second half of the paper, you could drop down to the next row. If the conflict is not resolved, this is what the resilient family does. On the other hand, if the conflict is not resolved, this is what the members of the family that does not display resilience do. If you'd like to apply block structure, you can follow the columns of the table down, just like we showed with the Venn diagram earlier. So a family that displays characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by. If the conflict is not resolved, the members of a resilient family interact with one another by. And then, let's go back up to the top. In contrast, a family that does not display characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by. And if the conflict is not resolved, the members of the family that does not display resilience interact with one another by.
Now, finally, whichever you choose, okay, if you choose point by point or if you choose block, you're going to have to bookend your contrasts for this paper. Bookending means writing an introduction and writing a conclusion. So for the introduction, what is resilience? I mean, how long have I been talking about resilience and families with resilience characteristics and families lacking resilient characteristics? In the introduction, you must define what you mean by resilience. Second, you're going to have some type of a discussion on why is it important for families to be resilient in the first place? I mean, people function on all different types of levels in our country and around the world. So what does it mean to be resilient in a family? And why is it important for families to be resilient? What two subjects will you compare and regarding what points? So a family that displays characteristics of resilience manages their conflicts by boom, boom, boom. Okay. If the conflict isn't resolved, the members of the resilient family interact with each other by boom, boom, boom. Okay. A family doesn't display characteristics of resilience. You've already defined resilience. How do they manage their conflicts? Boom, boom, boom. If the conflict isn't resolved, if the members of the family that doesn't display resilience interact with each other, what does that look like? Boom, boom, boom. Okay. That's the breadth. That's the middle part of your paper. You've got an introduction. What's resilience? Why is resilience important for families? What two subjects will you compare regarding what points? Then you've got the middle section of your paper. You're going to either do point by point or you're going to do block for your comparison and your contrast. Then you're going to write a conclusion. Review the main points of your contrast. What is important for the reader to take away? What are the main points? You have educated us. You have enlightened us. You've shown us things to help us in our decision making. You've shown us things to help us rethink family and resiliency. What can we learn from reviewing these differences between families with and without characteristics of resilience? So, for the final part, introduction, what is resilience? Why is it important for families to be resilient? What are the subjects you're comparing and regarding what points? That's the introduction. Then you've got the main body of your paper is either going to be point by point or it's going to be block discussing the family with resilience versus the family lacking resilience. And then finally, a conclusion. In your conclusion, review your main points of contrast and then tell us, what have you just enlightened us with? What can we learn from reviewing these differences between families with and without characteristics of resilience? That's it
Thanks,
for me, Emma.
Tanya. Thank you for going through all that stuff about the comparison and the contrast and the bees and the elephants. It's fun. So now we're going to get into the next learning objective, which is putting all of this together into a draft that reflects APA format. We already discussed strategies for organization, but how do these things, point by point structure and block structure, fit into APA organizational norms? So for instance, a feature of APA writing, which has a great focus on clear communication, is the use of section headings. In APA, a major section of a draft can be indicated with a level 1 heading, which we center in bold and title case on its own line before the paragraph text starts. Title case means that all the major words in the heading and all words in the heading, including prepositions or conjunctions of 4 or more letters, are capitalized. So on the left, we have a list of headings that you might want to use if you write the paper in point by point structure. In this case, the level 1 headings can list the topics or the points. So we have conflict management, capital C, capital M. Interactions amid unresolved conflict for section 2. Notice that even though amid is a preposition, it's got 4 letters, so we've got it capitalized. And then you would have another heading for conclusion. On the other hand, if you want to use block structure, your headings can list the subjects that you're talking about. So the first major heading could be a resilient family. The next could be a family that does not display resilience. And again, you would have a level 1 heading for the conclusion. If you'd like assistance setting up your draft in APA format, we have this awesome tool called our ACU APA course paper template, and we invite you to use it. It has all the settings for the font, margin, page numbers, headings, the spacing, the hanging indent for your references, all of it's preset, and you can access that template via this link in our slide deck or by visiting our online Writing Center website. Keep in mind that if you use the template, you'll need to download it in Word, but that's perfect for this assignment because you have to create a Word document anyway. So for the rest of this webinar, we're going to discuss APA guidelines for citation, referencing, and paraphrasing. For this week's assignment, you need to respond by integrating sources from the assigned readings. So first, let's talk about how to cite and reference the course text, which is what we call a whole authored book. A whole authored book just means that instead of different authors writing individual chapters, one author, or in this case, we have a pair of authors, the Bouswicks, they wrote the entire book themselves. To write the reference for a whole authored book, first we put the author's last names and their first and if middle initials available, middle initial too. So we've got J period space O period. And then notice that even though we've got two authors here, we've got a comma after that first author's name before the ampersand symbol. After we put the information for both authors' names for the textbook, we're going to put the year of publication in parentheses, 2014, followed by a period. The title of the book goes in italics and sentence case. Sentence case means that you capitalize only the first words of the title and the subtitle, or any proper nouns if they happen to be in there, or proper adjectives, any proper word forms. So basically, it's like if you were writing a sentence, if this were a sentence, what words would you capitalize? So here we've got a capital T in the, we have a capital A, and we have Christian capitalized because that is considered a proper word form. If you've got addition information, you can put that in parentheses after the title. We've got fourth, the number 4, TH, and ED followed by a period for addition in this entry. And last, you need the publisher. A great thing about APA format is that once you've written the reference, you know how to write the in-text citations because APA always applies a format that we call author date citation. For a paraphrase, you can name the authors and the year in parentheses at the end of the sentence, separated by a comma. It goes at the end of the sentence that contains the borrowed idea. So here we've got Bouswick and Bouswick, comma, 2014 in parentheses after the paraphrase. That's called a parenthetical citation. You can also write what we call a narrative citation, where you include the names of the authors right in your sentence. Bouswick and Bouswick, parentheses, 2014. Notice that the year is still going to immediately follow their names, as we see in the second example. You might want to take note of the fact that since we have two authors, in the parentheses, we connect their names with the ampersand symbol. But as part of a sentence itself, we need to write out the word and. This is an APA guideline. Some of your other sources for the week are journal articles. So we're going to look at the format for a journal article using one of your articles as a model. The article that we're using as a model is by Duncan and several other authors. So just as we did with the textbook reference, we put the first author's last name, Duncan, and then comma, J period, space, M period, comma. And then we list the rest of the authors' names in the same sequence as they're listed in the article. Next, we're going to put the year of publication in parentheses. This time it's 2022. And then we put the title of the article in sentence case. Sentence case, again, means that we capitalize the first word of the title and the subtitle and any proper nouns or adjectives. Here we just have a title and a subtitle, no proper word forms. So I've just capitalized the F in family and the V in variations. Next, so that the reader knows where this article is located, we need to provide information about the larger journal in which it was published. So this time we put the title of the journal in regular title case. That means that we're going to capitalize all the major words. And we're also going to capitalize all the prepositions and conjunctions of more than 4 letters. We talked about this kind of capitalization when we talked about headings a little earlier. So here we've got family and journal both capitalized, and there are no short words that we need to consider. The title goes in italics followed by a comma, and then the volume number also goes in italics. So that 30 is italicized, just like Family Journal. The issue number goes in parentheses next, but that's not in italics. It's just in parentheses. Then we put another comma followed by the page range. The page range is separated by an N dash. It's not a hyphen. It's a little bit longer. And last, we put the DOI number. Or if there's no DOI, we can put a publicly accessible URL. Both the DOI and the URL would begin with https:// In APA format, we always precede the number string for a DOI. By number string, I mean that number that starts with 10.11. We always precede that with https://doi.org/. That's the standard way to present, and it enables people to click on or search for that DOI and find it magically online somewhere. Once again, because we've written the reference, we know how to cite this work in text using author date citation. So for the first paraphrase, I put the author and year information in parentheses at the end of the sentence, separated by a comma, Duncan et al., period, comma, 2022. This work has 3 or more authors. So every time I cite them in my text, I'm going to use the first author's name, Duncan. Then I'm going to use that et al. Phrase. Et al. Means others in Latin. So I've got researchers have identified optimism as the strongest predictor of family resilience. Duncan et al., period, comma 2022 in parentheses. For the next example, I used a narrative citation format and I named them in text. Duncan et al. 2022 found that optimism acts as the strongest predictor of family resilience. Even though I'm writing their names in my sentence, I'm still using that shortened et al. Format. Duncan et al. Period. Here's a handy dandy table that reviews how to format in-text citations for different numbers of authors. If you have one author, you're obviously just going to use their name. In the parentheses, it would be Watkins, comma 2023, or if you wanted to name Watkins in your sentence, Watkins, parentheses 2023, acknowledged, blah, blah, blah. For 2 authors, we again have the Balswick examples, Balswick and Balswick, comma 2014, in parentheses with the ampersand between their names, or Balswick and Balswick 2014 described, with their names connected by the word and. And then again, we have an example with the 3 or more authors, Duncan et al. 2022 in parentheses, or Duncan et al. Parentheses 2022 found. And again, we're using the et al. Format with the period after all. You do not need a comma between Duncan et al. And the year if you're writing their names in your sentence. Duncan et al. Period 2022 found. You don't need a comma there. You only need a comma if both things are in parentheses together. Another thing you may have noticed in these examples is that we've used past tense verbs. Watkins acknowledged, Balswick and Balswick described, and Duncan et al. Found. Because we're going to be writing in APA format, if we discuss what other authors have done, said, or found, we use past tense because APA considers that that work was done in the past. So a past tense verb reflects that time frame. And as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about effective paraphrasing. Tanya pointed out earlier that when you paraphrase, sometimes it's a task, but it really helps show that you have processed the information on your own. So remember that for this assignment, you can't use direct quotations at all. You must paraphrase all the borrowed information in your own words, and you need to accompany all paraphrased ideas with a citation in APA's author date format. So as you show that you have processed this information effectively, instead of just pasting something in from someone's draft, you're going to have 2 different strategies that you can use. You need to make sure that you use different words than the original text, and you need to make sure that you use a different sentence structure, or what we call like an order of ideas, than the original author. So we're going to look at an example of what this means. This is from Balswick and Balswick, 2014, page 6. So their text says, examples of familial descriptive language used in the Old and New Testaments for the relationship between the Creator God and the created ones are, and they listed a few, and then they said, Jesus welcomes little children, women, the disenfranchised, and his disciples into close, intimate connection. I wanted to paraphrase this for my slide earlier, where we showed you how to do their citations and references. So I wrote this. Jesus invited individuals young and old, including his disciples, women, and the marginalized, into close relationships that echo the paradigm of family, And I've got my parenthetical citation, Balswick and Balswick, 2014. My slide won't go forward. Oh, there we go. Okay. My space bar was sticking. So let's consider what makes this an effective paraphrase. So remember I said that an effective paraphrase changes the words and the order of ideas from the author's original text. In the original quote from the Balswicks, the first sentence refers to this idea of describing family. And the second idea, which I highlighted to kind of visually separate it, provides the example about Jesus. So in my paraphrase, I flipped it. I used the opposite sequence. The example about Jesus is first, and then the idea that his relationship echoes this concept of family or familial descriptive language, the way I rewrote it. That part came second. If you look in the highlighted area, you can see that I also changed the orders of ideas just within that portion, talking about Jesus's relationships. The original refers to, quote, little children, women, the disenfranchised, and his disciples. In the paraphrase, I put individuals young and old, including his disciples, women, and the marginalized. So I swapped it all around. And I've also made targeted changes to the vocabulary. For instance, Balswick and Balswick referred to the disenfranchised. I used a synonym, the marginalized. Oh, but wait a minute. Gosh, I did use the words women and disciples, and those are from the original. Tanya, is that okay? Can I do that?
Ding, 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 ding. Maybe people, maybe humans. I mean, you have the marginalized. That's good. Women and children were marginalized during Jesus's time. So, you know,
That's true. So I did refer to women and disciples. It's okay if I take
yeah,
those two words because
yeah.
they're super common words. I don't really know how else to refer to Jesus's disciples to give you a concise bit of information about who I'm talking about. That's what they were called. They were the disciples. So I'm going to repeat that word. And using women, I could say female people, I could say something else,
Mhm.
but let's just say women because they're women.
Yeah,
And as
yeah.
long as I have these words embedded in a mostly original, larger context, it's fine. The whole thing
I
is
think you could,
rearranged. Yes?
yeah, you could cover yourself maybe. Jesus invited individuals, regardless of age, whatever, humans.
Hmm.
He accepted humans into the paradigm of family, including disciples, women, the marginalized. I don't know. I think it works.
Thank you. So just make sure when you are
Now back to elephants and
back to elephants and bees after we talk about Jesus and the paradigm of family. We like to have fun in the online writing center. So as we wrap up, I will remind you that for help with the specifics of APA formatting, with your citations and references for different sources, you can consult our APA 7 publication manual or the official APA website at the URL that we have here. You can also email us at the Online Writing Center. And actually, both these resources, including your APA publication manual and their website, are really helpful if you want more information about paraphrasing. All right, so now we have reached the end of our webinar on good practices that we may want to use to write a compare and contrast draft. Today, we use several very fun examples to explore strategies for writing compare and contrast papers. Workshop CONR 628's Week 4 Assignment 4, Resiliency and Family Conflict, and develop this paper as an APA formatted draft. Before we go, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the services we provide at the Online Writing Center. You can check out our Online Writing Center group in my ACU. You can watch the video linked on the second line for the steps to make an appointment and submit your paper. We will work with you at any stage of your writing. And we offer two types of appointments to do that. We have email asynchronous appointments where you upload your paper and we send you feedback within 24 hours. That email is titled something like the Writing Center Report. And we also have Zoom appointments. If you make one of those, just go to the schedule and click on the Zoom link at the time of your appointment. And keep in mind that on our schedule, all the appointments, regardless of type, are in Central Time. You can also access many writing-related resources on our online Writing Center website. Our submission process is very easy. When you schedule your appointment, you can upload your paper to the appointment form, or if you just want to make the appointment, your paper's not ready yet, you can schedule the appointment and go back later and upload your paper to the appointment form. You can contact us at our email address, onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. Click the second link to schedule an appointment, or the third to visit our Online Writing Center website. We offer a bunch of resources. Earlier, we talked about our APA course paper template, which is available at this link. We offer a YouTube channel that has lots of our webinars there. And we have our Online Writing Center blog with posts about topics related or ranging from grammar to the role of a tutor to how to deal with the world of AI when you're writing. It's full of useful tutor insights. If you're interested in learning more about comparing and contrasting, especially in the context of categorizing, you may want to watch our other webinar on writing a compare and contrast essay. That one relates to FAMO 452's assignment of is it nature, nurture, or both? Obviously, there you're going to be comparing characteristics of families, of people, and or is
Behavior.
it coming from nature? Is it coming from nurture? Is it coming from both? I'd be interested to read some of those papers.
Me
You
too.
can get the webinars on our website or on our YouTube channel. And this concludes our webinar on recommended practices for writing a compare and contrast paper. We thank you all for learning with us today. We hope you learned something about bees versus elephants and comparing and contrasting and how to consider traits of resilience or a lack of those traits in families and how they impact their functioning. Again, I'm Emmy Amarati with Tanya Hart, who I just love dearly. So we thank
Oh, I
you.
love you too.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Emmy. Oh,
Tanya. We are.
thank you guys for being here for this. I hope you take a lot of things away that will help you in your compare and contrast papers. God bless you.
Thanks, Tanya. And if you need any help, let us know. We got your back here.
Yes.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Tanya.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you so much.
Thank you, Emmy.